Hello and welcome to this webinar, which introduces 3 new resources that were released by NDIS this month. My name's Jenny Klause. I'm one of the sector support consultants with NDIS in the New South Wales office, and I'm joined today with one of my colleagues, Edwina Pickering, who is also a sector support consultant.
Hi everyone.
We begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today, wherever you're located across Australia. These 3 guides will assist leadership teams to examine and determine the required processes and practices for operating in the NDIS quality and safeguards environment. Thank you. In today's webinar, we'll give you some background to and purpose of each resource, as well as introduce the content. We will also respond to your questions at the end of the webinar via email. Just so please note you're all on mute, and if your audio connection via your computer isn't clear, call in using the details available on the sidebar. To ask questions at any time, please message the organiser via the chat tool available in the sidebar. All your questions will be recorded, so should we not have time to get back to answer your question during the webinar, we'll get back to you as soon as possible. So during this session, we'll review 3 new NDIS companion resources targeting NDIS registered providers. The first is People with Disability and Supported Decision Making. This resource provides tips on supporting people with disability to make their own decisions and identify when an alternative decision maker is needed. The next is Quality and Safeguards in the NDIS, a provider guide. The guide provides a comprehensive checklist for NDIS Commission requirements and promoting participants' human rights. And finally, the Business Analysis Tool. This tool has 7 areas of organisational operations to enhance outcomes and includes a range of suggestions for ongoing improvement. NDIS hopes that these 3 new documents provide practical and thought-provoking information for NDIS registered providers. When organisations are complying with requirements and reflecting best practice, they can have greater confidence that their systems are enhancing positive outcomes for both people with disabilities and for organisational performance. NDIS would like to acknowledge the funding to create these resources was provided by the New South Wales Government's Industry Development Fund. And whilst New South Wales providers are targeted in these resources, the content really is relevant for each state, as the NDIS Commission requirements are national and will require a national approach. These resources are available on the NDIS website under the Resources tab, and the link will be on the final slide.
Thanks, Jenny. The first NDIS resource that we're going to talk about today is People with Disability and Supported Decision Making. Supported decision making is the best practice approach to enhance the ability of people with a disability to make their own decisions. This guide is for workers, volunteers, managers and directors, board members of NDIS providers. Note that some legal information in the guide is specific to New South Wales, but most information is relevant across Australia. I'll just read the slide.
Okay.
Because this is the background to the whole of the guide. We cannot give someone the right to make a decision about their own lives. They already have this right, but by our words and actions, we can take the right away.
So what decisions are we talking about, Edwina?
Well, the answer is very simple, is that it's every decision, but the answer is also a bit more complex. because some people with a disability may find that some decisions are harder than others, and particularly if the decision determines big issues in their lives. In fact, sometimes we all need support when making a big decision. The right to decide means that a person with disability may need support to learn how to make those decisions. However, sometimes no amount of support will enable a person with a disability to make a very difficult or complex decision. This guide covers all of these issues. So the contents of the guide, and it has different sections. The first section is all about rights, and this describes the legal framework for the rights of people with a disability to make their own decisions, including the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, the NDIS legislation, and the current New South Wales legislation. Supported decision making. This section describes the practical steps about identifying when a person needs support to make a decision, and then how to provide support to that person to make the decision. And it includes several examples. Note that it's not just people with a disability who may need to learn how to make their own decisions. Staff may also need to learn how to support people well and have access to the tools and resources they need to use when providing support to people with a disability. Or it might be that staff don't know how the person communicates their wishes and preferences. And then a section is on when support is not enough. And this outlines how lawful decisions can be made when a person with a disability can't make a particular decision. The next section, challenges for NDIS providers. This section pulls together the issues raised throughout the guide and suggests strategies that providers could consider. And at the end, there are a number of resources and links, including free decision-making tools and resources, frequently asked questions, tables with who can make NDIS decisions, and checklists for workers, managers and boards. Oh, thank you. So throughout the guide, there are many examples of supported decision-making in practice, and they use this three-step approach. So the first step is what decision needs to be made. The decision needed should be clarified. So ask, is it a complex or straightforward decision? What is likely to happen if a decision isn't made? Then the second step, what are the indicators that the person might need support? The person might show by their words or actions that a decision is difficult, which could indicate they need support.
Can you give some examples of how they might show they need support?
Sure. The person might refuse to discuss aspects of the decision, or they might ask other people to make the decision for them, or they might seem unable to understand the decision that even needs to be made. Providers should also consider other factors that might affect the person's difficulty with the decision, such as language or cultural issues, personal values or attitudes, or they might be feeling unwell and just not up to making the decision at that time. Step 3, would support enable the person to make the decision? And the answer to this question determines what action the provider could then take. So if yes, provide support and information to the person so that they're better able to weigh up the key facts and issues and then make the decision themselves. And note that that person might be able to make the decision themselves but need support to implement the decision. If the answer is maybe, you could provide support and information to the person and test their ability to weigh up the facts and the issues. If the person expresses a preference that's one of several suitable options, then you could accept that as the person's view as their decision. But if the answer is no, and you've assessed them as being unable to make that decision, the provider should ensure that there's evidence to support the view. You should obtain the decision from the relevant authorised decision maker. Certain types of decisions do require a formally appointed decision maker, but many decisions can be made informally by someone who's close to the person, such as a family member or a friend. However, important decisions that are covered by legislation must be made by a person with authority to do so. It's important to note that providers and staff can't lawfully make decisions on behalf of people with a disability. So here's an example to show how supported decision making could work in practice. So the example for the first step, what decision needs to be made, we're going to use the example of leaving the family home to live in new accommodation. So step 2, what are the indicators that the person needs support? Well, it could be any of these. The person might be unhappy at home or running away. They might be talking about living somewhere else. They might not be taking steps to find accommodation options, or they can't decide between the available options. So in this example, step 3 is the questions about would support enable the person to make the decision. If yes, then discuss the options and what the next steps for the person could be. If the answer is maybe, you could assist them with the planning of such as their budget, or identify preferences, like do they want to be near their workplace or with a friend, and you could assist them to research and visit suitable options. But if the answer is no, you might need to find an alternative decision maker. Please note that this is quite a big decision, but it also involves lots of smaller decisions, and the person with a disability might be able to make most of them with support.
Edwina, what if some good options are found, but then the person either couldn't or wouldn't make a decision?
Yeah. Look, they should be encouraged to make as many decisions as they can, but they still might not be able to make the key decision. And in this case, they might be able to identify somebody they can trust who can make that decision, such as their parent. The decision can be made informally if the person's happy to go along with it. However, if the person's refusing all the options and the move is necessary, then someone else will need to be formally appointed to make the accommodation decision. In New South Wales, this would involve an application to the Guardianship Tribunal of NCAT, and there are similar systems in other states and territories.
Okay.
Now, there are some challenges, of course, for providers to make it and it is difficult to fully implement supported decision making for people with a disability. And some of these key challenges are understanding participants' rights, culture and systems that promote participants' decision making, the capability of staff to implement supported decision making, access to supported decision making tools and resources, funds in participants' plans to develop decision making skills, external barriers such as family or carers insisting on a specific decision, or other providers denying participants their rights to make their own decisions, assessing when a participant can't make a specific decision or when there's no alternative decision maker. And the guide explores each of these challenges and suggests some strategies to address the issues.
Great, thanks Edwina. So now I'm going to introduce the next guide. This is the Quality and Safeguards in the NDIS, a provider guide. This guide was developed as an easy go-to reference for NDIS registered providers that identifies all the new requirements that the NDIS Commission places on providers that need to complete certification against the NDIS practice standards and also meet the Commission's rules as a condition of registration. NDIS developed the guide with a working party and then piloted the guide with a range of providers. Just by the side, we'd like to thank representatives from those organisations that participated in that pilot. We see there are two audiences for this guide. The primary target audience is providers with limited knowledge or experience of NDIS Commission requirements. As the Commission is phasing in at different times across Australia, there are many providers with limited experience of the Commission's requirements at the moment. The secondary audience, we believe, are experienced providers who want to just check that they have everything covered. It will be useful for a range of providers as the content is not prescriptive.
Jenny, what would providers expect to achieve by using the guide?
So we anticipate the outcomes for providers from using the guide. There are many, including confirming you're on the right track, identifying any gaps that you might have, contributing to the development of an action plan, to meeting the new requirements, and then helping your organisation to understand the cultural shift towards embedding both quality and safety in the provision of supports, and finally assisting providers understand the new regulatory requirements. Thanks, Edwina. So with the introduction of the Commission's requirements, providers are asking themselves what parts of my quality and safeguards processes might need to be reviewed. This guide focuses on these new Commission requirements in the following areas. So, conditions of registration, the NDIS practice standards, the core module, incident management and reportable incidents, complaint management and resolution, the NDIS code of conduct, restrictive practices and behaviour support, and worker screening. So, how to use the guide. The guide can be used as a checklist for providers needing to understand and address the requirements mentioned on the previous screen. For each new requirement, the guide addresses the following: general implications for providers, the roles and identifying roles and people that have specific responsibilities for each requirement, identifying what information must be available for participants, identifying key documents that providers will need to develop and maintain for both their organisation and for the Commission, and finally identifying the mandatory staff training associated with each requirement. In addition to this, for New South Wales providers, the guide contains as an appendix a comparison document between the NDIS practice standards and the New South Wales quality framework that includes the previous New South Wales Disability Services standards. And this shows what practices providers will already have in place and those which are new. It also provides a neat summary of the New South Wales provider requirements relating to reportable incidents. So how to use the guide. These next two slides show an example of the guide in relation to the Commission's requirements around complaint management. So it just shows and illustrates the format used. So as I mentioned, it starts with implications for providers. So in relation to complaints management and resolution, organisations will need to review your complaint management policies and procedures to ensure they reflect the NDIS Commission requirements. And there is a link down on this page. Ensure your organisation has determined who will liaise with the NDIS Commission about any complaints you receive. Ensure your organisation has procedures for when an incident is also the subject of a complaint. And this may include cross-referencing or integration of your complaints and incident management systems. And determine you have systems to collect and track key data relating to complaints, the use of restrictive practices, incidents and near misses. Then on to roles and responsibilities. The guide suggests you identify who will receive complaints and how initial actions that they need to take, identify who will conduct any investigations, and amend job roles and position descriptions accordingly. And then regarding participant information, ensure your information for participants covers your own complaints management process and how people with concerns can also contact the NDIS Commission to make a complaint. And this next slide follows on from showing the format. The guide recommends, regarding essential documents, that you clearly identify in your service agreements what can and will be delivered by your organisation. Your complaint process information is available on your public media, and the complaint management policy ensures your internal complaint management and resolution arrangements afford procedural fairness to all people when managing a complaint. And then finally, staff training implications. So train all workers in the use of and compliance with your complaints handling system, and determine the training requirements of staff who will be undertaking your investigations. And then there are also relevant links to all the Commission's guides and documents.
Jenny, this is a lot of additional burden on providers at a time when the NDIA processes are still not working well yet. What does this mean for providers?
Well, this is why the guide was developed, to streamline the requirements into a comprehensive checklist. But compliance helps to promote human rights of people with disability, and it's especially important in preventing harm to people receiving support. So indeed, many providers will choose to go beyond just the mere compliance with minimum practice standards and some other safeguarding mechanisms the Commission uses to facilitate safe, respectful and inclusive support.
Oh, well, thanks, Jenny. The third new NDS resource is called the Business Analysis Tool, and it's for providers who want to self-assess one or more aspects of their organisation's activities and promote ongoing improvement. It can be used by a wide range of organisations and service types. So the purpose is promoting compliance, financial sustainability and enhancing outcomes for people with disability and for organisations. The contents of the tool are in different sections. So the first section of the tool outlines 3 aspects of person-centred business design principles based on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, the NDIS principles and customer-focused business principles. And then there are 7 checklists with key domains for any organisation, and there'll be more information on the domains in the next slide. Each checklist has essential systems and high-level NDIS specific systems. And then for each domain, there are also ideas for innovation and ongoing improvement. And at the end of the tool, there are also links to other resources and financial ratios, including NDIS specific ratios. So the Business Analysis Tool uses these 7 domains, and they're the key areas for all organisations: strategy, corporate governance, customers and market focus, quality and safeguarding, financial sustainability, people and capability, and information and knowledge management. Now, providers could select one or more domains where they want to improve, and then use the relevant checklist of essential systems and NDIS systems to self-assess what they have in place. Any gaps can be included in a work plan for compliance and improvement. How providers use the tool it's really up to you. Note that domain number 4 on quality and safeguarding is at a high level, so it doesn't duplicate the more detailed checklist in the other NDS guide on quality and safeguarding, but they could be used together as a more comprehensive review.
How did you decide on which domains to use?
Yeah, well, these 7 domains, they're the same ones that were used by NDS in the Roadmap Toolkit that was developed several years ago now. That tool was designed to help providers transition to the new NDIS framework. But this new tool is focused on how NDIS providers can stay flexible and sustainable into the future. So here's an example of how the tool might work. Using parts of just one domain on number 3, that's the customers and market focus. So here we've chosen one question from several that are essential for all organisations. So question 4 in that domain, do you have defined processes to attract and retain customers, including a person-centred culture demonstrated at all organisational levels, strategic connections with the key community organisations and stakeholders that might refer customers, and marketing strategies that align with demonstrable outcomes, such as what you say is what you do, and do they differentiate your services from your competitors? And so when you go through each question, the provider's asked to rate their answer as yes, no, or partly. So using this same example, this is one of the questions that is in the NDIS essentials on the checklist. So the question is, do you have systems to ensure that all staff understand the NDIS services and supports that your organisation provides, and their obligations relating to the information provided to participants? And so each domain then has several suggestions for ongoing improvement, and the strategies are explored in a bit more detail. Here are the areas for improvement in the domain customers and market focus: person-centred culture, promote independence, outcome measures, and know the marketplace. You could consider whether or not the ideas would add value to the organisation's systems and processes.
Thanks, Edwina. So that brings us to the end of our information on the 3 new NDS resources. We hope this webinar has been useful and has given you a good idea about how they can be useful for yourselves and your organisations. It's time now to answer your questions, so please use the question box on the side of the screen. If you have any questions that you did not want to ask in the webinar, please feel free to contact either myself or Edwina. Our contact details are on the screen there, as is the link to the where you can find the free resources on the NDS website. Thank you for the time today, and that brings the webinar to a close.